So there I was, floating in the most pretentious space station this side of the Andromeda Galaxy, watching humanity's greatest diplomatic minds get laughed at by a bunch of aliens who looked like they'd been designed by committee, and not a good committee, mind you. More like the kind of committee that decides cafeteria menus and parking regulations. The Galactic Council chamber was this massive crystalline dome that screamed, "We have too much money and questionable taste in architecture." Floating in the center like some sort of cosmic judge was Council Leader Vexstar, a being that resembled what would happen if you crossed a praying mantis with a tax auditor and gave it delusions of grandeur. So, Vexstar wheezed through his translator, his 4 compound eyes somehow managing to look bored despite being incapable of blinking. "The primitive mammals of Earth request protection for their newest colony. How quaint." Ambassador Patricia Wong, Earth's finest diplomat, and someone who clearly drew the short straw for this assignment, straightened her jacket with the kind of dignity you can only maintain when you know you're about to be humiliated on an interstellar scale. Council Leader Vexstar, humanity offers tribute in exchange for protection of New Haven Colony. As per Galactic Law 847b, we present our most formidable predator as proof of our species' potential. The chamber filled with what I can only describe as the sound of 1,000 cosmic bullies trying not to snort with laughter. Counselor Blixobi, who looked like a purple octopus wearing a toupee, actually slapped his desk with what might have been a tentacle. "Most formidable predator," Vexstar repeated, his mandibles clicking with amusement. "Let me guess, humans. Another one of your so-called tigers. Perhaps one of those great white sharks you're so fond of documenting in your amusing nature programs." Long smiled with the practiced patience of someone who'd clearly rehearsed this moment in front of a mirror while questioning her life choices. "Not exactly, Council Leader. May I present Earth's true apex predator?" The cargo bay doors hissed open, and out walked Keeper Johnson, a guy who looked like he'd rather be literally anywhere else in the galaxy. He was wheeling a standard Earth shipping crate, the kind you'd use to transport, well, pretty much anything that wasn't particularly impressive. Johnson cleared his throat. "Counselors of the Galactic Assembly, I present Brutus." He popped the latch on the crate. "Earth's honey badger." The silence that followed was the kind of silence you get when someone tells a joke at a funeral and everyone's trying to figure out if they heard correctly. 30 pounds of black and white fury emerged from the crate, took one look around the chamber, and somehow managed to project an aura of complete disdain for everything and everyone present. Brutus the honey badger had arrived, and he was already unimpressed. Vexstar's translator stuttered for a moment before finally managing, This is a joke, yes? Your most fearsome predator is a small, fluffy creature that appears to be having a bad hair day." And that, ladies and gentlemen, was when the Galactic Council made their first mistake. They underestimated Earth, but more importantly, they underestimated the honey badger. Brutus looked up at Vexstar with the kind of expression that suggested he was already planning something unpleasant for the oversized insect, then promptly began grooming himself with the casual indifference of someone who had places to be and aliens to terrorize. Meanwhile, 3 sectors away on New Haven Colony, Administrator Jake Morrison was having the kind of day that made him seriously reconsider his career change from zookeeper to colonial administrator. Turns out, managing a frontier settlement wasn't that different from running a zoo, except the animals were human and complained more about the food. Jake stood on the observation deck of New Haven's main habitat dome, watching his colonists go about their daily routines of pretending everything was fine while secretly panicking about their complete lack of adequate defenses. The colony was humanity's latest attempt at expansion, a collection of prefab domes and agricultural units that looked impressive in the brochures but felt distinctly flimsy when you were actually living in them. "Jake," came a voice behind him that belonged to Dr. Elena Vasquez, the colony's chief scientist, and the only person who seemed genuinely excited about being stuck on a rock in the middle of nowhere. "We've got incoming ships, big ones, and they're not sending friendly hello messages." Through the dome's transparent aluminum windows, Jake watched as sleek, predatory vessels dropped out of hyperspace with the kind of theatrical flair that suggested their owners had watched too many war documentaries and taken notes on intimidation tactics. The lead ship was a massive thing that looked like someone had taken a sword, painted it black, and decided it needed more weapons. A lot more weapons. The kind of ship that didn't bother with diplomatic niceties because it preferred to let its particle cannons do the talking. Jake's communication panel crackled to life, and a voice that sounded like it had been processed through a meat grinder filled the command center. Primitive human settlement, this is Commander Krillax of the Zephyrian 4th Assault Fleet. You will surrender immediately and prepare for occupation. Resistance is not only futile but frankly insulting to our professional reputation. Jake looked at Elena, who shrugged with the kind of helpless gesture that said, "I'm a botanist, not a military strategist." Their colony's defenses consisted of a single plasma cannon that was older than most of the colonists, some automated turrets that were great for keeping local wildlife away from the crops, and a shield generator that could probably stop a really determined pigeon. "This is Administrator Morrison," Jake replied into his communicator, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "New Haven Colony is under the protection of the Galactic Council. Any hostile action would be a violation of interstellar law." The sound that came back through the speakers was definitely laughter, but the kind of laughter you hear from someone who collects parking tickets as a hobby. "Oh, human, you are amusing. The Galactic Council's protection is worth precisely as much as your pathetic defenses. We are the Zephyrian Empire. We have conquered 17 star systems, enslaved 43 species, and perfected the art of making civilizations disappear. Your little mammal colony will be a pleasant afternoon's entertainment." Jake was frantically trying to remember if his zoo experience had taught him anything about dealing with oversized predators when Elena grabbed his arm. "Jake, there's something else. Earth Command sent us a priority shipment, arrived about an hour ago." She held up a shipping manifest that looked suspiciously routine for something that was supposed to save their lives. It's listed as Emergency Colonial Defense Package, but honestly, Jake, it's just a shipping crate, with air holes. Through the view screen, Jake watched as Krillax's fleet moved into attack formation with the precision of a military force that had done this exact same thing dozens of times before. The Zephyrians were clearly the kind of conquerors who had turned invasion into a science, complete with standardized procedures and probably a manual titled Subjugation for Dummies. "Air holes?" Jake asked, because sometimes the universe hands you exactly the kind of absurd detail that makes you realize your life has become a comedy written by someone with a very dark sense of humor. "Air holes," Elena confirmed. "Jake, I think Earth just sent us a pet." 20 minutes later, Jake found himself standing in the colony's cargo bay, staring at a shipping crate that had traveled across half the galaxy to deliver what appeared to be humanity's idea of a practical joke. The crate was standard issue, about the size of a small refrigerator, and was making soft scratching sounds that suggested whatever was inside was either very bored or very annoyed. "So," Elena said, consulting her tablet with the kind of scientific curiosity that had probably gotten her into trouble before, "according to the manifest, this is a Mellivora capensis, also known as a honey badger. Native to Earth. Says here it's been specially selected for adaptive colonial defense applications." Jake rubbed his forehead, feeling a headache coming on that was roughly the size of the Zephyrian fleet currently positioning itself to blow them all to atoms. "Elena, please tell me there's some kind of mistake. Please tell me that Earth's master plan for saving our colony isn't a batcher." "Well," Elena said, which was never a good way to start a sentence when you were hoping for reassurance, "honey badgers are technically considered one of Earth's most fearless animals. They've been known to fight lions, raid beehives, and generally ignore the concept of insurmountable odds." "Fight lions," Jake repeated flatly. "Elena, the Zephyrians have plasma cannons." Before Elena could respond with what would undoubtedly be another piece of unhelpful scientific trivia, the scratching sounds from the crate intensified, followed by a series of metallic grinding noises that suggested whatever was inside had decided subtlety was overrated. "Should we, let it out?" Jake asked, because apparently his day wasn't complete without making at least one decision that he'd regret for the rest of his presumably very short life. Elena was already moving toward the crate's release mechanism. "It's been in there for 3 days. The poor thing probably needs water and food and—" The crate's latch clicked open and out stepped 30 pounds of black and white attitude that somehow managed to make the entire cargo bay feel smaller. Brutus the honey badger emerged, took a long look around at the colony's state-of-the-art facilities, and his expression clearly conveyed his opinion that he'd seen more impressive accommodations in garbage dumps. "Hello there," Jake said, because apparently he'd decided to try diplomacy with a badger. "I'm Jake, and this is Elena. We're very glad you're here to help us with our little invasion problem." Brutus looked at Jake with the kind of expression you might give to someone who'd just suggested that the best way to deal with a house fire was to throw more matches at it. Then he wandered over to the cargo bay's security door, which was made of reinforced titanium steel composite and rated to withstand direct hits from most small arms fire. Without ceremony, Brutus began chewing on the door frame. Is he eating our security door?" Elena asked, her scientific fascination warring with the growing realization that their salvation had very different priorities than they did. Jake watched as Brutus methodically worked his way through what the manufacturer had assured them was indestructible military-grade materials. I think he's renovating. Within 5 minutes, Brutus had created his own personal exit through the cargo bay wall, completely bypassing the door's sophisticated lock system, biometric scanners, and electronic access controls. He paused in his newly created doorway, looked back at Jake and Elena with what could only be described as pity for their overcomplicated lifestyle choices, and then wandered off to explore his new territory. Jake, Elena said, watching their supposed savior disappear into the colony's ventilation system. I think we might be in trouble. Outside, Commander Krillax was probably finalizing his attack plans, confident in the knowledge that he was about to conquer a defenseless human settlement. Inside, Jake was beginning to suspect that defenseless might not be the right word, but he wasn't entirely sure defended was accurate either. What they were, he realized, was about to find out what happened when an unstoppable force met an immovable object that didn't care about physics. 3 hours later, Commander Krillax was feeling particularly good about himself as he reviewed his invasion plan for the 14th time. The human colony's defenses were laughably inadequate, their personnel were clearly undertrained civilians, and their response to his ultimatum had been a polite request to please consider alternative diplomatic solutions. It was almost insulting how easy this was going to be. Status report, Krillax barked at Lieutenant Vexner, his second-in-command and the kind of officer who believed that excessive preparation was the key to a successful military career. Sir, preliminary scans confirmed the human settlement has 1 obsolete plasma cannon, basic automated perimeter defenses, and a shield generator that appears to be held together with optimism and spare parts. Total defensive capability is approximately 0.003% of our minimum engagement threshold. Krillax's 4 mandibles clicked with satisfaction. The Zephyrian Empire had built its reputation on overwhelming force and tactical precision, and this human colony was going to be another textbook example of why resistance was futile. He'd probably have this wrapped up in time for the evening meal. Excellent. Deploy Landing Force Alpha through Gamma, Standard Pattern 7. I want this colony secured within 30 minutes. Try to keep at least some of the structures intact. The Empire prefers its new territories to look presentable for the occupation documentation. Down on the colony's surface, Jake Morrison was experiencing the kind of panic that comes from watching your worst fears unfold in real time, while knowing that your best-case scenario still involved complete and utter defeat. Through the command center's main view screen, he could see Zephyrian assault shuttles dropping from orbit like deadly black raindrops. Elena, he called out, trying to sound like a competent administrator instead of a former zookeeper who was desperately out of his depth. What's our status on the perimeter defenses? Elena looked up from her console with the expression of someone delivering news that was somehow worse than expected. The good news is that our automated turrets are functioning perfectly. The bad news is that they're designed to discourage curious wildlife, not military assault craft. I'm pretty sure those Zephyrian shuttles have armor plating that's thicker than our entire defensive grid. Jake watched the first wave of enemy landing craft touch down just outside the colony's perimeter, disgorging troops that moved with the practiced efficiency of a force that had conquered dozens of worlds and never met a defense they couldn't crack. The Zephyrans were tall, insectoid creatures that looked like they'd been specifically designed to appear in nightmares about alien invasions. Activating colony-wide alert, Jake announced over the intercom, his voice carrying to every dome and habitat module in New Haven. All colonists to emergency shelters. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Although honestly, I wish it was. The colony's single plasma cannon swiveled toward the landing zone and fired its first shot, a bright blue beam that struck the lead Zephian assault craft and left a scorch mark roughly the size of a dinner plate on its hull. The Zephyrians didn't even slow down. Jake, Elena said, her voice tight with the kind of controlled panic that comes from being a scientist who suddenly finds herself in the middle of a war zone. Our plasma cannon just did exactly nothing to their armor, and I mean exactly nothing. I've seen mosquito bites that were more threatening. Through his tactical display, Jake could see Zephyrian troops advancing on the colony's perimeter with textbook precision, their weapons scanning for targets while their engineers set up what looked like siege equipment, designed to crack open the habitat domes like eggs. This was clearly a force that had done this exact same operation so many times, they could probably do it in their sleep. Sir, came a voice over Jake's communicator that belonged to Sergeant Mills, the colony's head of security and a man who'd spent his entire career preparing for threats that were significantly less intimidating than a professional invasion force. "They're jamming our communications and setting up some kind of barrier field around the perimeter. Standard surrender protocols recommend that we, surrender." Jake was about to respond when his tactical screen lit up with proximity alarms from the colony's outer sensor grid. Something was moving through the ventilation systems, the maintenance tunnels, and apparently straight through several walls that weren't supposed to have holes in them. "Elena, what is that? Please tell me it's not the Zephyrins flanking us through the infrastructure." Elena consulted her readings, her expression shifting from panic to confusion to something that might have been the beginning of hope. "Jake, it's not the Zephyrians. It's moving too small, too fast, and in patterns that make absolutely no tactical sense. It's like something is just wandering around the colony, completely ignoring our defense protocols and apparently uninterested in taking cover from hostile fire." Outside, the first Zephyrian patrol had reached the colony's outer perimeter, their advanced sensors scanning for defensive positions and weak points in the human fortifications. Squad leader Thaknor was feeling confident about this assignment. Humans were known for their primitive technology and emotional decision-making, neither of which were likely to pose a significant challenge to Zephyrian military superiority. "Command, this is Patrol Alpha. We have reached the primary perimeter. No significant resistance detected. Human defenses appear to be even more pathetic than intelligence suggested. Beginning breach procedures on the outer habitat ring." That was when Thaknor encountered something that wasn't in any of the intelligence reports, tactical manuals, or invasion protocols. Something small, black and white, and utterly unimpressed by the concept of military superiority, was sitting in the middle of the landing zone, apparently grooming itself. "Command," Thaknor said, his voice carrying a note of confusion that wasn't typically part of standard military communications. "We have an unidentified biological entity in the target zone. It appears to be ignoring us." Brutus looked up at the Zephyrian patrol with the kind of expression that suggested they were interrupting something important, which in this case was his systematic exploration of what appeared to be a reasonably interesting new territory. The fact that it was currently being invaded by heavily armed aliens was, as far as Brutus was concerned, someone else's problem, until the Zephyrians made it his problem by pointing their weapons at him. Thaknor, following standard protocol for dealing with unidentified life forms, raised his plasma rifle and aimed it at the small creature. "Biological entity, you are in a restricted combat zone. Withdraw immediately or face termination." Brutus stopped grooming, looked directly at Thaknor with the kind of focused attention that should have been a warning sign, and then did something that no Zephyrian tactical manual had prepared them for. He attacked. What happened next was the kind of thing that military historians would later struggle to classify in their official reports, mainly because there wasn't a proper tactical category for "small mammal decides that heavily armed aliens are personally offensive." Brutus launched himself at squad leader Thaknor with the kind of focused rage that comes from being threatened while trying to enjoy a perfectly reasonable grooming session. 30 pounds of honey badger hits 7 feet of armored Zephyrian warrior, and physics briefly forgot how it was supposed to work. Thaknor went down like he'd been hit by a freight train with claws. "Command, this is Patrol Alpha," came Thaknor's voice over the comm, though it was significantly higher pitched than before, and punctuated by sounds that the Zephyrian military communication protocols didn't have proper classifications for. "We are under attack by something that appears to be, get it off, get it off, get it off." The rest of the patrol, trained soldiers who had faced down everything from plasma-wielding rebels to carnivorous plant monsters, watched in growing horror as their squad leader was systematically dismantled by what appeared to be a very small, very angry carp. "Sir," said Trooper Zeknal, raising his weapon toward the chaotic ball of fury that had been his commanding officer, "should we fire on the hostile biological?" "Negative," screamed Thaknor from somewhere inside the whirlwind of claws and attitude. "You'll hit me. Just figure out how to make it stop." This was when the Zephyrians made their second tactical error. They'd tried to solve their honey badger problem with more weapons. Trooper Vixmar stepped forward with a stun baton, the kind of non-lethal weapon designed to incapacitate even the largest hostile life forms. He activated it, the crackling energy field humming with enough power to drop a charging rhino, and move toward the thrashing combat. Brutus, apparently deciding that one Zephyrian wasn't enough to work out his frustration, abandoned the thoroughly defeated Thaknor and turned his attention to the new threat. The stun baton, designed to deliver a paralyzing shock to any organic target, made contact with Brutus's thick hide. The honey badger looked at the crackling energy weapon with the expression of someone who had just been mildly inconvenienced by a mosquito bite. Then he grabbed the baton in his teeth and began using it as a chew toy. "It's impossible," Vixmar said, watching his military-grade weapon being casually destroyed by something that looked like it should be living in a nature documentary. "Stun batons deliver 12,000 volts. Nothing organic can just ignore that kind of electrical discharge." Brutus finished dismantling the stun baton, spat out the pieces, and gave Vixmar the kind of look that clearly communicated his opinion about aliens who made assumptions about his electrical tolerance. Then he proceeded to demonstrate why assuming anything about honey badger capabilities was a mistake that most creatures only made once. Back in the colony command center, Jake was watching his tactical display with the kind of fascination that comes from witnessing something that shouldn't be possible but was happening anyway. "Elena," he said, his voice carrying the tone of someone whose worldview was being systematically demolished, "are you seeing this? Because I'm seeing it, but I don't think I'm understanding it." Elena was hunched over her sensor readings, her scientific mind trying to process data that made absolutely no sense according to everything she knew about biology, physics, and the basic laws of military engagement. "Jake, according to our perimeter sensors, there's a single small biological entity systematically dismantling an entire Zephyrin patrol. It's moving through their equipment like it's made of tissue paper, ignoring their weapons, and apparently treating their armor as some kind of obstacle course designed for his personal entertainment." On the tactical display, they could see Zephyrian troops scrambling to reposition, calling for backup, and generally experiencing the kind of panic that comes from encountering something that doesn't follow the rules. Their neat military formations were dissolving into chaos, as soldiers tried to figure out how to fight something that was too small to hit effectively, too fast to corner, and too angry to reason with. Commander Krillax, monitoring the situation from his flagship, was experiencing the kind of confusion that comes from receiving field reports that sound like someone's fever dream. "Patrol Alpha, report your status immediately," he barked into his communicator, his mandibles clicking with irritation. "Sir," came Thachner's voice, now accompanied by what sounded like distant explosions and the distinctive noise of expensive military equipment being systematically destroyed. "We have encountered an unknown hostile entity. It appears to be some kind of Earth predator. Our weapons are ineffective, our armor is ineffective, our tactical protocols are ineffective. Sir, I think it just ate through our communications array." "Impossible," Krillax replied, because accepting the alternative would mean acknowledging that his perfectly planned invasion was being derailed by something that probably weighed less than his breakfast. "Earth predators are primitive mammals. Deploy heavy weapons, use plasma grenades if necessary." This was when the Zephyrians made their third and most critical error. They decided to escalate. Patrol Beta arrived with plasma cannons, fusion charges, and the kind of overwhelming firepower that had reduced fortified positions to smoking craters. They found the remains of Patrol Alpha's equipment scattered across the landing zone like the aftermath of a very localized natural disaster, and one small black and white creature, sitting in the middle of it all, apparently taking a nap. "Target acquired," announced Beta Leader Caxrin, training his plasma cannon on the sleeping form, preparing to eliminate hostile biological with extreme prejudice. Brutus opened one eye, looked at the assembled firepower pointed in his direction, and somehow managed to convey through body language alone that he found their lack of imagination disappointing. Then he did something that would later be studied by xenobiologists for decades. He burrowed. Not slowly, not carefully, but with the kind of determined excavation speed that suggested he had somewhere important to be, and the ground was merely a minor inconvenience. Within seconds, he had disappeared into a tunnel that definitely hadn't been there moments before. "Where did it go?" Caxton demanded, swinging his plasma cannon around the empty landing zone. "Biological entities do not simply vanish into solid ground." The answer came from directly beneath their feet, where Brutus was conducting his own version of urban warfare. Zephyrian military engineering, it turned out, was impressive against conventional weapons, sophisticated against energy attacks, and completely unprepared for something that viewed structural integrity as a personal challenge. Brutus emerged from underground directly beneath the Zephyrians' heavy weapons platform, which had been designed to withstand direct hits from orbital bombardment. It had not been designed to withstand 30 pounds of honey badger attacking its structural supports from below. The platform collapsed with a crash that could be heard across the colony, taking several million credits worth of military hardware with it. Brutus emerged from the wreckage, shook the dust from his fur, and looked around for his next target with the satisfaction of someone who had just solved a particularly engaging puzzle. Commander Krillax, watching his invasion plan disintegrate in real time, made a decision that he would later claim was a strategic withdrawal, but which everyone involved knew was just panic. "All units, fall back to secondary positions. Establish a perimeter at safe distance from the hostile biological entity. We need to reassess our tactical approach." But Brutus wasn't interested in letting them regroup. Having decided that these particular aliens were unacceptably rude visitors to his new territory, he began what could only be described as a systematic campaign to explain proper etiquette through the application of claws, teeth, and an apparently inexhaustible supply of righteous indignation. The Zephyrians, meanwhile, were learning that retreat is only an effective strategy when the thing you're retreating from doesn't follow you home, and then redecorate your fortifications according to its own architectural preferences. Jake, watching the entire invasion force being systematically dismantled by what Earth had described as their emergency colonial defense package, was beginning to understand why zookeeping had been such excellent preparation for colonial administration. "Elena," he said, as another Zephyrian position exploded in the distance, "I think we might actually survive this." "Jake," Elaine replied, tracking Brutus's progress as he worked his way through what had been the most feared military force in 3 star systems, "I think we might be the safest colony in the galaxy." 6 hours later, Commander Krillax found himself in the unprecedented position of requesting emergency evacuation from what was supposed to have been a routine conquest. His invasion force, which had successfully subjugated 17 star systems without breaking a sweat, was now scattered across New Haven Colony's landscape in various states of disarray, demoralization, and what his military psychiatrists would later classify as acute honey badger syndrome. "Imperial Command, this is Fleet Commander Krillax requesting immediate tactical withdrawal from the human colony designated New Haven," he reported, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone whose professional reputation had just been fed through a wood chipper operated by a small mammal. "Negative, Fleet Commander," came the response from Admiral Thexvar, whose own military career had been built on never accepting defeat from anything smaller than a battlecruiser. "The 4th Assault Fleet does not retreat from Ammalian settlements. Complete your mission." Krillax looked out at what remained of his invasion force. Patrol Alpha was hiding in their landing craft, too traumatized to emerge. Patrol Beta was attempting to rebuild their equipment from spare parts and wishful thinking. Patrol Gamma had reportedly been found arranged in an artistic pattern around their own weapons, apparently as some kind of decorative statement about the futility of military aggression. "Sir," Krillax replied, choosing his words carefully because military reports were supposed to maintain a certain dignity, even when describing complete tactical disasters. "We have encountered an indigenous defense system that falls outside all known parameters of conventional warfare. The Earth creature appears to be indestructible, impossibly aggressive, and completely immune to reason, tactics, or overwhelming firepower." "Explain." "Sir, it ate through our primary assault vehicle. When we deployed plasma weapons, it used them as recreational equipment. When we established a defensive perimeter, it redecorated it according to its own architectural preferences, which apparently involved significantly more holes than our engineers had originally planned." There was a long pause from Imperial Command, the kind of silence that comes from trying to process information that sounds like it was generated by a random military disaster generator. "Fleet Commander, are you reporting that the mighty Zephyrian Empire has been defeated by a single Earth animal?" Krillax watched through his viewport as Brutus emerged from what had been the remnants of Heavy Weapons Platform Charlie, carrying what looked like a plasma cannon that he was apparently planning to use as a backscratcher. "Sir, I am reporting that the Earth animal has defeated us. The distinction may be academic, but I felt it was important to maintain accurate records for the inevitable court-martial proceedings." Meanwhile, back in the Galactic Council chamber, Council Leader Vexstar was experiencing the kind of morning that makes you reconsider your choice of career, species, and fundamental understanding of reality. The emergency session had been called after reports began filtering in from across the galaxy about something the intelligence reports were calling the New Haven incident. "Let me understand this correctly," Vexter said, his compound eyes focusing with difficulty on the datapad that contained information he really didn't want to believe. "The human colony that we refused protection because their tribute was insufficiently impressive has successfully repelled a full Zephyrian invasion fleet using the same small creature they offered as tribute." Ambassador Wong, who had returned to the council chamber looking significantly more confident than she had during her previous visit, smiled with the kind of satisfaction that comes from being completely vindicated by events beyond your control. That's correct, Council Leader. Earth's honey badger has proven remarkably effective at colonial defense. We're prepared to discuss expanding our tribute arrangements with other council members who might be interested in similar protection services. The chamber filled with the kind of nervous muttering that happens when people realize they may have seriously miscalculated something important. Councillor Blicksoup, who had been so amused by Earth's fluffy creature just days before, was now looking at Wong with the expression of someone who had just discovered that the joke was on him. Perhaps, Vexstar said carefully, we should reconsider our assessment of Earth's defensive capabilities. What other tribute species does your planet have available? Wong consulted her datapad with the casual confidence of someone who was about to completely revolutionize interstellar politics. Well, we have several options. There's the African Cape buffalo, which is essentially a ton of muscle with anger management issues. The saltwater crocodile, which is basically a prehistoric killing machine that never got the memo about extinction. And then there's the Australian drop bear. Drop bear? Asked Councillor Zixnith, who was clearly trying to assess whether this was more or less terrifying than a honey badger. We don't like to talk about the drop bears, Wong said, with the kind of ominous understatement that suggested humanity had been saving their best material for later. Let's just say that the honey badger was our entry-level diplomatic gift. Back on New Haven Colony, Jake Morrison was filing the kind of incident report that he was pretty sure no colonial administrator had ever had to write before. How do you officially document that your settlement had been saved by 30 pounds of attitude with claws? Final assessment, he dictated to his computer. The emergency colonial defense package provided by Earth Command proved remarkably effective against hostile invasion forces. The biological defense system successfully neutralized enemy combatants, destroyed or disabled military equipment, and established territorial control over the entire combat zone. Recommend immediate implementation of similar systems for all frontier colonies. He paused, looking out at the colony's landscape, where Brutus could be seen methodically dismantling the last of the Zephyrian equipment, apparently because he found their design philosophy personally offensive. Additional note, Jake continued. Future Earth Command shipments should include detailed care and feeding instructions, as well as a manual on honey badger behavioral patterns for colonial personnel. Also recommend that any diplomatic negotiations involving Earth's biological defense systems should emphasize that these are entry-level offerings. Alina looked up from her scientific analysis station, where she had been trying to write a research paper that would somehow explain how a single Earth mammal had defeated a military force equipped with technology centuries ahead of anything humanity possessed. Jake, she said, I just received a priority message from Earth Command. They're asking if we need any additional support. Apparently, they're prepared to send us a wolverine if we think the honey badger isn't sufficient for our security needs. Jake considered this for a moment, watching as Brutus completed his redecoration of the former Zephyrian landing zone, and then wandered off to explore other parts of his new territory, apparently satisfied that he had adequately explained the rules of proper behavior to the rude aliens. Alina, he said finally, I think one honey badger's probably sufficient for most security threats, but ask them to keep the Wolverine option available, just in case we ever encounter something even more aggressive than the Zephyrians. More aggressive than the Zephyrians? Elena asked. Jake, what could possibly be more aggressive than a military force that's conquered 17 star systems? Jake smiled, thinking about his previous career managing Earth's most dangerous wildlife, and all the species that humanity had apparently been keeping in reserve for special occasions. Elena, trust me on this. Earth has been saving the really scary stuff for when we need to make a serious impression. And somewhere in the galaxy, other potential invaders were receiving intelligence reports about the New Haven incident, and quietly deciding that maybe humans weren't such an easy target after all. Because if this was what Earth considered appropriate for a small frontier colony, nobody really wanted to find out what they kept in reserve for protecting their homeworld. Brutus, meanwhile, had found a sunny spot near the colony's main dome and settled down for a well-deserved nap, completely unaware that he had just revolutionized interstellar diplomacy and established honey badgers as the galaxy's most respected defense consultants. After all, he was just doing what honey badgers do best, not caring about the odds, not backing down from a fight, and making sure that everyone understood the rules of his territory. Even if his territory now happened to include an entire star system.